Let's see if we can apply our two moral theories to the trolley cases that we discussed last time. Kantianism, recall, at least this formulation of the categorical imperative, which is sometimes called the principle of humanity, says the basic principle or rule of right and wrong is always treat people, both yourself and others, as ends in themselves and never as a mere means. We talked a little bit about the difference between treating somebody as a means and treating them as a mere means. The basic question, if we're going to apply the Kantian view to a specific case, is does the subject, or does the agent, in this case you, do you treat the one as a mere means? If we're discussing option 2 here, we want to know, does flipping the switch treat the one as a mere means to an end? And does pushing the fat man standing next to you in option 2 in the footbridge treat the one, that is the fat man, as a mere means to an end? That is the question we need to answer to apply Kantianism. Am I treating the one as a mere means? Now, it is not obvious when someone is being treated as a mere means and when they're not. Fortunately, Thomson, in the piece that you read, gives us a test to apply. I think this is useful. It is not, by the way, a test that every Kantian accepts, but I think it's an interesting and useful test for when an action treats another person as a mere means. Here's what she says. Suppose an agent is confronted with a choice between doing nothing, in which case 5 die, or engaging in a certain course of action, in which case the 5 live, but 1 dies. Then perhaps we can say, if the agent chooses to engage in the course of action, then he uses the 1 to save the 5 only if, had the 1 gone out of existence just before the agent started, the agent would have been unable to save the 5. Okay, so let's apply that test, which is if the 1 hadn't been there, would you still be able to accomplish your goal? Let's apply that to option 2 in the footbridge. In option 2, you're contemplating pushing the fat man in order to save the 5. So your goal is save the 5 people's lives. And the test that Thomson proposes to discover whether you're treating the 1, that is the man next to you, as a mere means to that end is, if he hadn't been there, would you still be able to accomplish your goal of saving the 5? And it's a really clear no in the footbridge case. If that man hadn't been there next to you, there is nothing you could have done to save the 5. You're not standing next to a switch. You're not the driver of the trolley. You could try to throw yourself in front of it, but the way we've set up the case, you're not big and heavy enough to stop the trolley. So it'll just run over you and then run over them. So if he hadn't been there, you wouldn't have been able to execute your plan of saving the 5. In that way, you are treating him as a mere means to your end in option 2. Now, that end of saving the 5 may be in certain ways morally admirable, but the way you're going about achieving that end is by disrespecting his dignity and autonomy as a person. You are treating him as though he were not, just like you, a bearer of reason capable of setting his own ends and making his own decisions. In that sense, you are showing a deep disrespect for the humanity in the man standing next to you. You are treating him as if he were a rock. I mean, you could just as well accomplish that goal with a big rock that had no reason. And in that way, you are disrespecting his dignity. And for Kant, that is one of the most basic kinds of violations morally that a person can do. In that way, you are, by pushing him, treating him as a mere means. And so for Kant, you are morally required to do nothing. Tragically, the 5 will die, but at least you will not be violating this man's dignity. What about the switch case? Well, it's a little more complicated in the switch case, and I think different Kantians approach it differently. Thomson, who we're going to be following, has, again, this genius proposal, which is a test for when You're treating a person as a mere means to your end. And if we apply her test, what we find is that you do not treat the one as a mere means to your end by flipping the switch. The reason for that is the test is, if the one hadn't been there, could I have accomplished my goal? And in this case, my goal in flipping the switch, or your goal, is to save the lives of the 5. So what Thomson says we should imagine is a scenario just like this one, but where that one person had not been on the tracks. In that case, by flipping the switch, would you be able to save the 5? Well, the answer is yes, because then the trolley would just go down the track with no one, and there would be no deaths at all. In that way, although you are doing something that you know will result in the death of the one, you're not using the one as an essential and irreplaceable object in your plan, in the way that you're using the one in the footbridge case. Now, that leads us to say flipping the switch, unlike pushing the fat man, seems to be not treating a person as a mere means, and therefore is permissible on this application of Kantianism. So if that's right, then this package, which is Kant's principle of humanity, the test that Thomson supplies us with for whether somebody's being treated as a mere means, seems to answer the second trolley problem, which is, why is it that we think option 2 is morally permissible whereas in the switch, whereas option 2 in the footbridge is not? And the answer is that option 2 in the footbridge treats the one as a mere means, whereas option 2 in the switch does not. There's another Kantian take on this, which doesn't solve exactly the second trolley problem. I mean, you might not think that Thomson's test of when you're treating somebody as a mere means is convincing. And if you don't like her test and you think, look, you're treating this person as a mere means regardless of what's true in some hypothetical scenario where they're not there. If you think that's right, then it would be impermissible under your version of Kantianism to flip the switch. And so what you would get would be a rejection of the trolley problem as opposed to an answer to it. Really what you would say is, it's not permissible to flip the switch, and it's not permissible to push the fat man. So it turns out on that version, the question, why is option 2 permissible in the switch but not in the footbridge, is a badly formed question because it presupposes they're both permissible when actually they're both wrong. I just wanted to flag that that's another possible Kantian analysis of these two cases. What about consequentialist moral theories? These moral theories say an action is morally right if they produce the best net consequences compared to any other thing you could do in the circumstances. We talked about one version of consequentialism, utilitarianism, that couches the best net consequences in terms of total amount of pleasure or happiness produced versus total amount of pain or unhappiness produced, but leaving this as just a formulation in terms of best net consequences without specifying what consequences are good or bad, we can see already that it's going to be pretty easy to apply consequentialism. The way we apply it is by asking, well, which option of the two you face in the two trolley cases produces the best net consequences? What produces the best net consequences? So when we look back at the switch case, we can see that option 1, doing nothing, means that 5 will die. That is our consequence that we can write here. 5 dead. Now, whether you have a utilitarian consequentialist theory or some other consequentialist theory, that obviously is a bad consequence, quite a bad one. On the other hand, option 2, flipping the switch, you have 1 dead. And so if consequentialism tells us that the right thing to do in a case like this is whatever produces the best consequences, clearly it is a better consequence to have just 1 dead than it is to have 5 dead. So as a result, option 2 is permissible. Indeed, notice option 2 is the right thing to do morally. That is, it's obligatory. So you have to flip the switch. Not flipping the switch on consequentialism would be immoral because you're doing something that results in more bad, in more death than you could have done. Well, what about the footbridge case? I mean, in the footbridge case, option 1 is the trolley runs over 5 and kills them. So option 1 is 5 dead. And option 2, pushing the fat man, is 1 dead. Just like option 2 in flipping the switch. Now, notice that we don't have to factor in anything about, as the Kantian does, the dignity of the one who dies, the inherent value of the one who dies. All we need to know is what are the end consequences. And here, the end consequences are precisely the same as they are in the switch case. 5 dead if you do nothing, and just 1 dead if you push the man onto the tracks. As a result, consequentialism implies that option 2 is morally permissible in the footbridge case as well as in the switch case. Now, again, not only is it permissible, it's also the right thing to do, in the sense that you are obligated morally, according to consequentialism, to push this man onto the tracks, because that is your way, your only way of minimizing the total harm done. That is a hard consequence of consequentialism. That's a tough pill to swallow. It might even be so difficult that you think this is maybe a reason to not like consequentialist moral theories, because they have no role for the inherent dignity of the person. I mean, in principle, there is nothing that is completely intrinsically off limits, according to consequentialism. If you can imagine a scenario where doing something like, say, torturing somebody could or would result in lives saved, then consequentialism say that's the thing you must do. Kant, on the other hand, would say it doesn't matter how many lives you can save, torturing somebody violates their basic humanity and their dignity as a person. For that reason, even if you could save 1,000,000 lives, it would still be wrong to torture. I want to flag a couple of things about what we've just done here. We just applied consequentialism to the switch case and the footbridge case, and what we saw is that it implies that it is permissible to flip the switch, that it's also permissible to push the man off the footbridge. Now, recall that the second trolley problem was the problem of explaining why it seemed to us that it was permissible to pull the switch but not permissible to push the man. Consequentialism says that is a bad question because it supposes that it is in fact wrong to push the fat man. As a matter of fact, if consequentialism is true, it's not wrong. So I don't know whether this counts as a solution to the trolley problem exactly, or to the second trolley problem, but it does avoid the trolley problem. It says these two cases, despite initial appearances, are perfectly symmetrical. I mean, if you want a little bit more reason for thinking that, it is a little strange, isn't it, that we have this intuition that it's okay to kill a person if you're many yards away from them at a switch, but not okay if you have to push them. Like, morally, those two things shouldn't matter. It seems as though, and the utilitarian and the consequentialist can argue, that what we're reacting to is something that's not really morally relevant in the situation. We care about not getting our hands dirty. But that morally shouldn't matter to us. What should matter is the harm and good that's done. And if that's what you think, then you'll agree. The footbridge case actually, although intuitively people tend to think that you should not push the fat man, that's wrong. Moral theory, therefore, comes in and corrects our mistaken intuitions about the footbridge case. The other thing I want to note is that you can construct your own trolley cases. You can, for example, construct a case in which you're at the switch and the person here at the switch is not a random stranger, but your own mother. In that case, what does consequentialism say is permissible, indeed obligatory, for you to do? Well, your mother's life does not count any more than a stranger's life. A life is a life. And that's true, for example, on utilitarianism. The reason that your mother or the stranger has value is that she or the stranger is capable of feeling happiness. Your mom can't feel more happiness necessarily than a random stranger. So for that reason, utilitarianism and consequentialism more generally are sometimes called impartialist moral theories. And the impartialist moral theories have this consequence that you ought to not be partial toward those that are near and dear to you, or even to yourself. Okay, so what we just did, to recap, is we laid out a couple of moral theories, consequentialism as a family of moral theories, the most prominent of which is utilitarianism, and we also discussed Kantianism, which says that there are some things that are off limits no matter the consequences. We then applied the two theories back down to our specific thought experiments, the switch and the footbridge. And what we saw is that they handle the second trolley problem in different ways. The Kantian moral theory says that, or one version of the Kantian moral theory says, our intuitions are basically right. It is okay to flip the switch because you're not treating anybody as a mere means, but wrong to push the man because you'd be treating him as a mere means. Consequentialism says our moral intuitions are screwed up. It is permissible to flip the switch, but it's also permissible to push the man off the footbridge and onto the tracks, because doing that saves more lives.